a certain sense, something completely different. Social finance is a not-for-profit also, working between government, social organisations and funders and investors around building new models of social change. And I guess the social impact bond is the thing that we've become best known for in this process. It's a model that's focused on something which I think is going to be very relevant to a lot of people in the room, which is around how do we get consistent funding and investment into preventative or early intervention type models. We found very consistently across government the money tends to go to the acute. And it's for this simple reason, this little problem we've got over here. You spend money on the crisis interventions, which make fewer resources available for the early ones. That means you've got poorer outcomes, which means you need more crisis interventions, and so on, round and round you go. The other version of this model, as someone put it to me, is do you shut the hospital bed, or do you close that and stopping smoking program? Which one are people going to complain about more? And I think we all know the answer to that, having seen campaigns to stop hospital wings closing and so on. So the acute services, there's a fixed bias, if you like, towards acute services, and we were very interested in what we can do about that. And we felt a way of trying to do that was to focus on, can we get some of the savings, and I'm coming back exactly to Paul's point, can we get some of the savings out of those acute services to pay for the preventative services? And so the question we put to the Ministry of Justice, we selected one, and fantastically the previous speaker was already talking about it, and that is that prevention of reoffending. And we focused on the short sentence offenders, because in down south, as I'm now going to refer to it throughout, that we don't have probation for those under a year in prison. You don't, well, fine, I have to have. But nevertheless, so therefore they basically come out of prison and they have about 6 weeks before their benefits kick in. And they've got about 40 quid in their pocket. And they're let out of prison, and it's at very early dawn. Think in Brixton in London, it's nice early dawn. They're let out at about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And this nice chap comes over and says, would you like some good weed? And relieves him of some of that £40 very early on. And then there's a pub to go to as well, because he hasn't had one of those for a while. And by the end of the day, generally speaking, he's fairly unclear what's going to happen next. About half don't know where they're going for the first night. And funnily enough, only 60% reoffend. When we looked at the numbers, those coming out of a short sentence, on average, have been incarcerated 7 times and have committed 45 previous offences. So some of them really rock, if that's the average. Okay. So what we did was we essentially said to the Ministry of Justice, what happens if you just pay for the outcomes? So if we can agree a way of measuring, and we can agree an economic benefit to you for these guys not coming back into prison, not taking up the court time, and so on, then can we have an agreement which says we will just get paid for the difference we make? So this, if you like, was a thin end of the wedge problem. Can we do something which is so absurdly good value to you that you feel you have to accept it? And it created what we found with this outcome-based structure, only pay for the difference we make, nothing more, is it created momentum behind the idea. And it shone a light into this area and way of working. And we were able, after a considerable period of time, to get an agreement on this contracting model we call a social impact bond with the Ministry of Justice to work in Peterborough Prison. And that was to say, we will work with cohorts of 1,000 prisoners coming out of that prison, and we will provide a set of services to them. And if we reduce their reoffending by 7.5% or more in aggregate, or 10% for each cohort, then we will get paid for the difference that we make. And we use that money to pay for a range of services which are put out here. Now, before you're saying that money, there is obviously a huge problem with this, and that is that you don't get paid for quite a long time. And if you go around to most of the social organisations in this room and say, hi everybody, we'd like you to take this lovely contract where you get paid in 3 years' time if you're really successful, they think you're completely insane. Okay? So instead you have to do something else, and what we did was we raised money, £5 million, from some investors to pay for the service in the meantime. And that was the money you use. Okay? That's socially motivated investors, clearly, and I'll talk a bit more about them in a moment. Now, the main benefit, as I mentioned, was the idea that we get this thin end of the wedge to start doing preventative services. The other benefit is you're only getting paid for the outcomes that you make. What does that mean? That means you're not getting told exactly what to do. Now, most contracting focuses on inputs and processes in quite an aggressive way, and that means that if you're doing something innovative, you're in trouble, because as soon as you learn what else you ought to be doing, it's not in the contract. If you like to take the extreme, if you get money from a Silicon Valley investor, and 12 months later you say, yes, I've got my business plan, and I'm still doing the same thing, they will fire you. Because you haven't learned anything in that 12 months, and that was the reason for your existence, was to learn as much as possible. If, on the other hand, after 12 months of government contract, you say, I'm really sorry, I want to change a whole bunch of stuff, they say, why? What have you done wrong? What didn't we get right in the first place when we were planning all this? That means you want to change all this stuff. So this is the essential difficulty with doing innovation under the present contracting model. Okay? So this allows you to do some outcome work. And what that meant was that we used the data in terms of how we were doing, and we used lots of process data, and we had lots of fun helping our social organisations we were working with put client management systems and so on in place, and then using that data to analyse it and come back and talk to them about how it was doing. And we had the lovely learning curve of them saying this data is nonsense, and we said, well, you put it in sunshine, and so on back and forth. But what was really good was a focus on really trying to improve the engagement as we move through the programme. Okay? And we've seen that right the way across the different social impact bonds we're doing. This focus in on data and measurement has allowed for that awful period when that narrative, that story you've been telling everyone for a long time, you then see it in the data and it's a bit awkward because it's not quite the same. And then after time it improves. And we found that very consistent. So that's the second piece, is this focus on adaptive management. And from a personal point of view, my personal view is if we want to get innovation into government systems and structures, if we want to do the right thing for disadvantaged people with complex needs, we have to have adaptive management as a norm and not some irregular, peculiar thing that sort of is considered rocket science. So that's a real focus for us. I'm going to fly across the next bits to get near at the end because I know that I'll get beaten up otherwise. But we've got this is created, we didn't know what we'd done when we created the social impact bond. We thought we'd done something quite interesting. But we found that around the world, it generated a great deal of interest. And since signing that agreement in March 2010, there are now 60 of these happening around the world. They've raised $200 million or a bit more, and there's about another 100 in development. And it has to be said that one of the things that's been most fun for me is being, at the moment as I am, focused about half my time on international development, and seeing the opportunities. Because if you think that a programme designed in Westminster is bad, if you want to see a programme designed in London and implemented in Malawi, that's really bad. So we can do a lot more harm, actually, in programmes that are fixed there. And that's an area that we're very, very focused on at the moment. So this has hit a lot of people's excitement button. But I don't want to pretend that it's all just straightforward and easy, okay? Because it isn't, and I'll touch on that in a moment. It's being used in a range of areas. We've touched on recidivism. There's a lot around youth engagement. And Ian, who's going to talk later, has got more expertise on that than I have, having run one of the early ones of those. We've got a focus at the moment for us on Worcestershire around loneliness amongst the elderly, where we're actually getting paid for reductions in loneliness, which I'm excited by. And the reason I think that's interesting, again, our focus is back to this adaptive management. It's not that we think that financial incentives work in every way, shape or form. We don't. We don't want financial incentives at the front line. That's not what we're about. It's actually simply that we want a contracting model which allows you to learn and change and improve. Okay? What do we need to make this work? We need robust, we need an issue that people care about, a clearly defined group of people to work with, some outcomes that can be measured, and an ability to value the outcomes. If you're wanting to see where the complicated bit is, it's agreeing the value on those outcomes. Because at the moment, there's a whole bunch of programs going on where people have told themselves a story about how well they're working, and no one actually knows. And therefore, achieving a value on those outcomes is often quite tricky. Just being completely frank amongst our friends in this room. And then you actually need to be confident that you've got an intervention or a reasonable chance of an intervention working. And you need to have something that investors care about. To be honest, getting investors engaged is the easy bit. Because you've usually had 18 months to build this, and by then, if you mention it too early to investors, they lose the will to live. So just try to keep it under your hats for long enough, and you've got plenty of time to raise the money. Unless you go through a government procurement process where you're doing 10 at the same time, and then you haven't got enough time to raise the money, but that's a second order problem. Who are these investors? We started off with charitable foundations. We've now found high net worth individuals. Whenever we've done one of these things, someone has called up saying they want to invest. It's been really fascinating. And there are now also specialist funds in this area. We're seeing constant growth in it, and I suppose what we're hoping is that we'll get a track record enough that you can start to invite or bring in other investor communities. I think there should always be something of a specialist science. I do not like the idea of a rapacious hedge fund manager wanting to make sure that you've maximised your outcomes, because that's where you put too much pressure on those outcomes and actually you start to get perverse incentives and people playing around with the system. But if you start worrying about perverse incentives, there are perverse incentives in what we're doing at the moment. There's a perverse incentive to minimise learning, for one. So I just digress slightly, but thinking about incentives is important. What attracted foundations to this? I'm going to go through this quite quickly. You'll see a whole range of different pieces, from collaboration to really wanting to demonstrate to government a new way of working, to wanting to add rigour to a programme they thought was valuable, that they're passionate about, to trying to create scale around something they care about. It's actually an interesting way for getting a foundation community and the government to work together, dare I say it. Quite often our friends in the foundation community do find government a bit tricky. Congratulations to the Robertson Trust for managing to bring them together, but nevertheless, a lot do find that relationship awkward and trying to run for the hills when they see government too near. I think this is quite an interesting way of starting to create that collaboration. What goes wrong? That's very important. The failure to agree outcome metrics and the valuation is probably the most tricky bit, and that attribution. What would have happened anyway? All right, I'm wrapping up, I promise. Failure to negotiate procurement and contract in a timely and collaborative way. I think once you get all this agreement on what you should do, how you procure it is still regarded very often as a nightmare. It does not fit the normal models. And then, when you've done all that, it's strange how often, in the first 12 months, the referrals are far lower than you're expecting. And I think then the culture shift to providers, which we've already talked about, and then finally, do you actually decommission acute services? I will leave you with that, just to say that if you want to learn more, the social impact bonds early years, we've only just produced this, and it's a very long, wonderful tome that has everything you ever wanted to know about social impact bonds, and there's a database of every social impact bond presently in existence, and a few in development as well. Thank you very much.